The restaurant was the kind of place where doors opened softly and voices stayed low. Crystal glasses caught the warm light. White tablecloths were pressed perfectly flat. Every detail whispered the same message. This place was not for everyone. At the center of it all sat the man who controlled the room. He was a millionaire old money. Not loud, not flashy. The kind of wealth that didn't need to prove itself. The staff knew his preferences without asking. His table was always ready. His word carried more weight than any written rule. When he nodded, things happened. When he frowned, people moved. No one challenged him. No one needed to. The guests around him mirrored the same comfort. They laughed easily, spoke confidently, and never questioned why everyone in the room looked the same. This wasn't written on the walls, but everyone understood it. This was a whites-only space. Protected not by signs, but by silence. The discrimination here wasn't loud. It was polished, clean, invisible to those who benefited from it. The millionaire believed deeply in one idea, that money decided worth. That success was proof of superiority. That access was earned, not denied. In his mind, the world made sense because it obeyed his rules. And tonight, everything was exactly as it should be. The staff moved carefully, almost nervously. They weren't just serving food, they were maintaining order. One mistake, one wrong guest, one uncomfortable moment could disrupt the balance. And balance, in this room, mattered more than fairness. Then the door opened. A man stepped inside who didn't belong, not by their standards. He wasn't loud. He wasn't rude. He didn't announce himself. He simply entered, calm and composed, wearing confidence that didn't come from money. The laughter softened. Forks paused midair. Eyes shifted toward the entrance. The millionaire noticed immediately, and in that instant, before a single word was spoken, the rules of the room were about to be tested by a man who didn't fit them at all. Muhammad Ali. Then someone walked in who didn't fit the rules. The man at the door didn't rush. He stepped inside.
With the kind of calm that made people notice without knowing why.
His suit was neat, his posture relaxed, his expression steady. Nothing about him demanded attention, and yet the room slowly surrendered it. Conversation faded. Laughter thinned out. The gentle clink of cutlery stopped. The staff froze. They exchanged quick glances, the kind that didn't need words. This was the moment they were trained for, but hoped would never come. The rules were clear, even if they were never written down. And this man, polite, composed, confident, didn't fit them. No one moved to greet him. No one asked his name. No one told him to leave. They simply waited. From his table, the millionaire noticed the shift instantly. He didn't look confused. He looked alert. He had spent his life reading rooms, spotting threats to order before they grew loud. And right now, this quiet stranger at the door felt like a disruption. The man stood patiently, hands at his sides, not demanding service, not challenging anyone. He looked around briefly, not with anger, not with fear, but with awareness. He understood where he was, and he understood what was coming. The staff hesitated longer than they should have. Someone cleared their throat. Another glanced toward the millionaire, searching for direction. In this restaurant, authority didn't come from management. It flowed from him. Still, no one spoke. There was no shouting, no insults, no raised voices. Just a tightening in the air, like a held breath stretched too long. The kind of silence that comes before a decision, one that can't be undone. The stranger took one small step forward. That was enough. The millionaire straightened in his chair, eyes fixed on the man now. His jaw tightened, not in anger, but in certainty. He already believed he knew how this would end. After all, this was his world, his rules, his space, and in moments like this, only one voice mattered. One decision was about to be made. One decision was about to change everything. The millionaire stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't create a scene. He didn't need to. His presence alone shifted the balance of the room. The staff straightened immediately, as if responding to an unspoken command. Chairs stopped moving. Every eye turned toward him. He took a few measured steps and positioned himself between the stranger and the dining room. The words came calmly, almost politely. This was not a place for everyone. Reservations were required. Rules had to be followed. Nothing was said directly. Nothing had to be. The message was delivered with precision, wrapped in manner sharp enough to cut. The kind of language that left no bruises, only humiliation. The stranger listened without interrupting. He didn't flinch. He didn't defend himself. He didn't remind the man who he was. He simply met the millionaire's gaze, steady and unbroken. For a moment, the room waited, expecting resistance, anger, maybe even a scene. This was the point where most men would push back, where pride would demand a fight, where names would be dropped and tempers would rise. But none of that happened. Instead, the stranger nodded slightly. Not in submission, but in understanding. The people watching stayed silent. No one spoke up. No one objected. Some looked away, pretending not to see. Others watched with quiet curiosity, relieved it wasn't them standing there. Silence, once again, protected comfort. The millionaire felt a familiar sense of control settle in. The order had been restored. The problem handled cleanly, efficiently, without embarrassment at least not for him. The stranger turned slowly toward the door. No argument. No confrontation. No demand for respect, just dignity. As he walked away, the air in the room shifted, not lighter, but heavier. Something unfinished lingered behind him, unnoticed by most. Ignored by all, the millionaire returned to his table. Satisfied, he believed he had one. But the stranger had made a different choice. Ali didn't argue. He did something worse. He didn't turn back. There was no sharp reply. No cutting remark. No final look meant to wound Muhammad. Ali simply adjusted his coat and walked toward the door at the same calm pace he had entered. Each step was unhurried, deliberate. The kind of walk that said nothing but meant everything. No threats followed him. No promises of consequences. No reminder of fame, titles, or power. He didn't tell them who he was. That silence confused the room more than anger ever could. Behind him, the millionaire felt a quiet satisfaction spread through his chest. The disruption had been handled. The rules had held. Order restored without noise. In his world, this was victory, the clean kind. The kind that didn't leave fingerprints. He sat back down, lifted his glass, and returned to conversation as if nothing had happened. The staff exhaled. Relief moved through them quickly. Relief that no scene was made. Relief that no decision had to be defended. Relief that discomfort had passed without demanding courage. Plates were lifted. Chairs shifted. Service resumed. The injustice was absorbed into routine. That was how it always survived. No, one chased after the man who left. No one apologized. No one questioned whether the rules themselves were wrong. Silence made it easier to pretend the moment. Didn't matter, but silence isn't empty. It lingers. Ali's restraint didn't erase what happened, sharpened it. There was no explosion to dismiss. No behavior to blame. No anger to point at and say, that's why he didn't belong. There was only the truth. Standing naked and unresolved in the air, the millionaire believed the story had ended in his favor. The staff believed the night had been saved. The guests believed they had witnessed nothing at all. They were wrong because silence doesn't disappear, it waits. And when it returns, it does so with weight. But silence has weight. The restaurant settled back into its rhythm, as if the interruption had never happened. Voices rose again. Laughter returned, smooth and effortless. Glasses clinked. Orders were placed. The room exhaled, grateful to slide back into comfort. Moments like the one at the door were inconvenient, but easily erased when everyone agreed not to remember them. At the center of the room, the millionaire was in his element. Friends leaned in toward him, smiling with approval. Someone made a quiet joke about keeping standards. Another praised how he handled the situation. Controlled, no drama. He accepted it all with a relaxed confidence, the kind that comes from never being questioned. plates arrived. Wine was poured. The evening carried on to them. The incident was already over. Reduced to a brief disturbance, a necessary correction, a footnote in an otherwise perfect night. No one asked about the man who had left. No one wondered where he went. The room had decided what mattered and what didn't. The staff moved faster now, eager to prove the disruption hadn't shaken them. Service sharpened. Smiles returned. The balance they protected felt intact again, but not everything sat perfectly. Between bites and conversation, small discomfort tugged at the edge of the millionaire's thoughts. Not guilt, not doubt. Something else. A faint sense of curiosity he didn't want to acknowledge. There had been something about the stranger, not defiance, but certainty. Not fear, but composure. Not anger, but control. It didn't match the pattern. He dismissed the feeling quickly, lifting his glass and joining the laughter again. This was his world. People like that didn't belong here, and if they did, they would have said so. Still, the image lingered longer than it should have. The way the man walked away. The way he didn't explain himself. The way he seemed. Untouched across the room, a guest leaned toward another table, lowering his voice. Just a comment. Just a question. Just a name. Spoken casually, almost as an afterthought. The millionaire didn't hear it yet, but he would, because the night wasn't finished, and a name would soon surface. It started as a whisper. Two guests at a nearby table leaned closer, their laughter fading into something quieter, more serious. One of them glanced toward the door, then back at the millionaire's table. "Do you know who that was?" he asked, almost casually. The question drifted across the room, light at first, easy to ignore. The millionaire barely looked up. People were always curious, always dramatic. "Who?" someone replied. A brief pause followed. "Long enough to matter, that man at the door," the guest continued. "That was Muhammad Ali." The words landed wrong. For a second, no one reacted. The name didn't fit the moment. It felt misplaced, like hearing thunder indoors. Someone laughed uncertainly, assuming it was a joke. "Muhammad Ali? That Muhammad Ali?" The laughter died quickly. Another guest confirmed it. Then, another. Details followed: where he had been earlier, who he was traveling with, how unmistakable he looked once you knew what to see. The pieces began to align, snapping into place with uncomfortable clarity. The millionaire's smile froze. Disbelief came first. Sharp and defensive. This couldn't be true. Ali was loud, famous, recognizable. He wouldn't walk into a room like that quietly. He wouldn't leave without a word. And yet, the memory replayed itself. The calm posture, the certainty, the way the man didn't argue, didn't explain, didn't need to. The realization hit like a delayed impact. This wasn't just a stranger. This wasn't just another man turned away. This was a global icon, a champion, a figure recognized around the world, not just for his fists, but for his voice, his courage, his presence. The room shifted. Conversations stalled again, but this time for a different reason. The comfort drained from the air. Approval turned to unease. People avoided eye contact. The story had changed, and everyone felt it. The millionaire sat still, glass untouched. Nothing about the room looked different, but everything felt wrong. The room didn't feel the same anymore. The laughter around the table thinned, then disappeared entirely. What had felt like admiration moments earlier now curdled into discomfort. Conversation shifted away from the millionaire, not loudly, but noticeably. The easy confidence he had worn all night began to feel exposed. Guy's suit suddenly 2 sizes too small. He replayed the moment in his mind. The way he stood. The words he chose. The calm refusal on the stranger's face. Now that he knew the name, Muhammad Ali, every detail cut deeper. What had seemed like control now looked small. What he had mistaken for authority now felt like fear dressed up as manners around him. Guests reacted differently. Some avoided his eyes. Others whispered behind raised glasses. A few looked at him with something close to pity. The room had quietly reassessed who he was, and the verdict wasn't flattering. Power, he realized, was fragile. It existed only as long as people believed in it. And belief had shifted. He imagined how the story would sound once it left the room. Not a man was turned away. But Muhammad Ali was refused entry. Not a quiet enforcement of rules, but an act of public humiliation carried out by someone who should have known better. For the first time that night, he felt small. He hadn't been the bigger man. He hadn't been the stronger one. He had only been the louder presence in a room that refused to challenge him, and now, silence had turned against him. He considered standing up against, planing himself, reframing the moment, blaming policy or tradition. But every excuse felt weak before it was even spoken. Words couldn't change what had already been seen. Across the table, someone cleared their throat. Another pushed their chair back slightly, creating distance. The damage was done. No amount of wealth could rewind the moment. No reputation could soften it. No apology spoken now would land the same way. He stared down at his untouched plate, appetite gone. Money couldn't undo this. The story didn't explode. It didn't make headlines the next morning. There were no cameras, no public statements, no dramatic confrontations. Instead, it moved the way uncomfortable truths usually do quietly, steadily, from one conversation to the next. Over lunches. In private clubs, behind polite smiles, a millionaire turned away Muhammad Ali. Each retelling stripped away another layer of justification. What remained was simple, sharp, and impossible to defend. The man noticed the change slowly. Invitations became less frequent. Handshakes felt colder. People who once laughed loudly at his table now kept conversations brief. No one accused him openly but judgment. Didn't need to speak to be heard. Even the staff saw him differently. They still served him. Still followed instructions. But something essential had shifted. The respect he once commanded had thinned into obligation. Eyes lowered more quickly. Smiles faded faster. The memory of that night hovered between them. It's unspoken, but present. He thought about apologizing. The idea came late at night, when pride loosened its grip. He imagined tracking Ali down, offering an explanation, maybe even an apology. Not for the room for himself, for the version of him that had been exposed, but morning always brought excuses. It was the policy. It was the time. It was how things were done back then. Pride argued loudly. Regret whispered softly. And pride kept winning. Not because it was right, but because it was easier. Days passed. Then weeks. The moment never returned to public view, but it never left him either. It lived in glances, in pauses, in the way his name now carried a quiet asterisk beside it. He had lost something he didn't know he was risking. Not money, not status, but moral authority. Some moments ask who you really are, and some moments once answered. Don't offer revisions. Some moments don't give second chances for Muhammad Ali. Silence was never weakness. By the time that night arrived, Ali had already faced racism in forms far louder and far more violent than a quiet refusal at a restaurant door. He had been insulted in public, denied opportunities, stripped of his title, and punished for standing by his beliefs. He understood something many never learn. Confrontation doesn't always change minds, but dignity exposes them. Ali knew the power he carried, not just in his fists, but in his presence. He knew what his name meant around the world, and he knew that revealing it in that moment would have shifted the focus away from the truth. If he had spoken, the story would have changed. It would have become about celebrity, about embarrassment, about a powerful man being corrected by a more famous one. The millionaire could have retreated into excuses, policies, and apologies made only because he was caught. Ali didn't want that. Victory. He wanted the moment to stand on its own, by choosing restraint. Ali forced everyone in that room to sit with what they had done, without distraction, without justification, without noise. His silence turned the spotlight away from him and onto the system that allowed the humiliation to happen so easily. That was real strength. Physical power dominates for seconds, Moral power lingers for years. Ali had knocked out champions in packed arenas, but this was different. This was about self-control, about refusing to trade dignity for dominance, about understanding that sometimes the most powerful response is not to react at all. He walked away because he could, not because he was weak, but because he was strong enough not to prove it. And in doing so, he left behind a lesson that outlasted the moment, the room, and the man who thought he had one. Ali won without throwing a punch, so who really lost that night? On the surface, the answer seemed obvious. One man was turned away. Another remained seated, surrounded by comfort, privilege, and applause. The night ended with full plates and untouched power. But time has a way of correcting first impressions. The millionaire kept his table. He finished his meal. He protected his rules. Yet when the night passed, so did the authority he thought he had secured. What remained was a moment attached to his name, a reminder that wealth can enforce silence, but it cannot command respect. Muhammad Ali walked away with nothing in his hands, and yet he lost nothing. Because respect isn't granted by money. It isn't earned through control. It isn't maintained by who you exclude. Real respect comes from character, especially when power invites you to abuse it. That night revealed the difference between influence and integrity. The millionaire had power in that room. Ali had power beyond it. One controlled a space. The other embodied a legacy. One relied on silence to preserve comfort. The other used silence to expose injustice. History remembers that difference. No one recalls the menu. No one remembers who sat at which table. No one celebrates the man who enforced the rules. But the dignity shown in that quiet moment still speaks because it stood for something larger than pride. This is why Ali mattered beyond boxing. Not because he could fight, but because he knew when not to. In a world that often rewards loud authority, Ali chose quiet truth. And that choice is why his name endures long after rooms like that one disappeared. The millionaire kept his table. Muhammad Ali kept his legacy. If you want more untold stories that reveal the real character behind the legend, subscribe, because some victories aren't won with fists, but with principles.